What is critical race theory? Why is there so much controversy around this topic? The right says it promotes hate against whites, while the left says it's essential for reaching equality for non-whites. I'm going to try to dig into this and take an honest look at it by examining how it came about and some of the criticisms. If you like these conversations, click the like and subscribe buttons. My name is Chris, and this is the Think Report. Florida banned the teachings of critical race theory in its schools, while California added it to their curriculum. Who's right here? Let's start by taking a look at how it came about. Critical race theory is a social movement based on the idea that racism is a social construct and not something we're naturally born with, which means it doesn't attribute racism to white people as individuals, but rather to institutions like education, judicial, healthcare, and labor market systems. It's the idea that racism can exist without racists. Critical race theory, or CRT activists, have the goal of eliminating institutional racism in all the race-based hierarchies. CRT developed over the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Its origins are owed to the critical legal theory, which argues that the judicial system favors those who are in positions of wealth or power, which has plenty of evidence to support it. The boundaries of power don't stop at the judicial system. There are plenty of cases where people have been legally excused or exempt from prosecution. Consider the presidency as an example. Arguably the most powerful position in the world, and probably one that could get away with murder. Critical race theory is an augmentation of critical legal theory, which takes the idea that the judicial system favors the wealthy and pivots to propose that the judicial system favors the white. Generally speaking, it aligns with a postmodernist viewpoint, which is a general skepticism of reason and a sensitivity to political and economic power. So where does the term critical come from? It's from the ideas of Karl Marx. Critical theorists maintain that a primary goal of philosophy is to understand and to help overcome social structures that oppress people. Believing that science has been used as an instrument of oppression, they caution against a blind faith in scientific progress, arguing that scientific knowledge must not be pursued as an end in itself without reference to the goal of human freedoms. Now, I buy into the idea that science should be pursued with the goal of freedom, but although I haven't read the Communist Manifesto yet, it does seem strange to purport that science is an instrument of oppression. A good thing that has come out of CRT discussions is that it encourages people to think critically about the ways that race and racism have impacted our culture. There are still examples floating around where healthcare, judicial, or education systems have been set up in a way that discriminates based on skin or other biological features. As an example, I've personally seen in a call center, there is a dress code aimed to maintain a minimum level of workplace professionalism. It prohibited certain clothing and hairstyles, one of them being dreadlocks. That's a problem since it's a common preferable hairstyle in certain black communities and considered culturally acceptable and in many cases professional. The intention of the rule wasn't to discriminate against black people, but rather to maintain a minimum level of workplace professionalism. The goal has since been changed, but it serves as an example of systemic racism. So why don't we just call it systemic racism? The reason is that many advocates for CRT define it as a set of tools we can use to douse for systemic racism. However, there is a problem here because systemic racism is specific. Give me an example, like the dreadlocks, and we'll change it. But CRT is non-specific. CRT is the idea that system advances for people of color tend to serve the interest of the dominant white groups, which is ambiguous. What interests? What ends up happening is that it just beats down on white people without any specific examples that anyone can do anything about. This is how that argument would go. White people set up the system. The systems discriminate against people of color. Any discrimination in the system is explained by systemic racism. Therefore, any remaining racism must be the result of white people. You can see how CRT is controversial. Brookings.edu says CRT does not attribute racism to white people as individuals or to even entire groups of people. Simply put, critical race theory states that U.S. social institutions, like the criminal justice system, The education system, the labor market, the housing market, and healthcare systems are laced with racism embodied in laws, regulations, rules, and procedures that lead to differential outcomes by race. But if they're laced with racism, it should be easy to find. No one is fighting against that. Just point to it and we'll fix it. But if you've got nothing in the system to point to, then it becomes a conversation about the people within the system. The last thing I'd like to point out is that, contrary to what CRT claims, racism is not only a social construct. There is something called the similar to me bias, where people assert characteristics to people who are similar to them. For example, if you think you're a kind person and you have red hair, you're more likely to assume that someone else you meet with red hair is also a kind person. It's a type of stereotyping and also a hiring trap for employers. Managers are more likely to hire someone who is similar to them because they believe that the candidate will also embody similar values and work ethic. Research shows that it's a poor way to evaluate candidates, right up there with asking for references. Everyone is born with an immutable similar to me bias. White people, black people, Asian people, men, women, we all have it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a survival tactic that allows us to quickly make assumptions about someone so that we can move on to other things, like gathering food or caring for our families. Yet, this is another example that CRT doesn't look at the data. The similar to me bias has been around for decades. For CRT to claim that racism is a social construct seems to illustrate its ignorance. CRT borrows much from Karl Marx's critical theory, which argues that you should not have a blind faith in science or knowledge. The point here is that most of the time, extreme progressivism doesn't yet have the science or the knowledge to make an informed decision, and sometimes we need to venture out into the unknown to find what works and what does not work. But CRT has many flaws and lacks philosophical rigor needed to achieve widespread adoption. In addition, we have the data on many of these things, like how many people wear dreadlocks, how many people of color are approved for mortgages, and the racial breakdown of adults with higher education. We can make decisions based on the data. We don't need to venture out into the unknown to solve systemic problems. Many systems have problems, but all systems have data. Think about that.